having been a TV personality, poll numbers are great. So you've got kind of an uphill battle there, and even if you do get elected, the chances of the legislature changing very much, and it's more, the legislature is more conservative than Governor Kasich. He's having trouble with it. How effective do you think? How good are your chances, and how, even if you make it, how effective would you be?
Well, I think my chances are pretty darn good. I'll tell you why. Because he's known by about 90% of the state, but that's not always a good thing. Sometimes people know who you are and they don't agree with you. And Governor Strickland was known by about 90% of the state. And Governor Kasich, if you actually look at what going back to 2009, if you look at the number of people that actually knew who he was in Ohio, it was well under 50%, believe it or not. And my numbers are under 50% too. And so are Governor Strickland's, by the way, when he started running. His numbers were even lower. Governor Strickland, when he first started running for office, or statewide office, his statewide name ID numbers were lower than mine are right now. Now, when I started it was one of the reasons, though, sir, that I began the campaign pretty early. And I began it earlier than is typical. I've been in about 84 out of the 88 counties, and there's still 13 months to go in the election. According to one poll, when I started, I was only known by about 10% of the state, which is basically my county. Now, in the last poll, it was closer to about 40%. That's typical in terms of where a challenger usually is at this point. We continue to get a lot of media coverage. There's a lot of interest in this race, 13 months before. An unusual amount of media coverage. So I think that I have the time to introduce myself to the people of Ohio. Again, according to poll, I don't live and die by the polls, but according to the most recent polling information, there's actually only been one public poll that's been released since the budget was passed on June the 30th and signed into law by Governor Kasich. And in that poll, I was at 38% of the vote, and Governor Kasich was at 35% of the vote. That's actually slightly better than he was doing against Governor Strickland at the same point in time last year. Now, why did his numbers go down so much? Because at one point in time, he was at least in the mid-40s. Although I have to say, this is a governor that has never really closed the deal with voters in Ohio. He was only elected with 49.2% of the vote. After Senate Bill 5, his approval numbers were in the 30s. His reelection number was in the low 30s. They creeped up to the mid to high 40s last year. And since some of the policy decisions, whether it's on the sales tax expansion or the homestead exemption or some of the social issues that he has taken position on, or just the fact that the economy has been rather lackluster for the last year, his numbers are, at least in the last public poll, were back down in the the mid 30s. So I don't think that people are entirely sold on what's been happening in this state. I don't think they agree with him on many of these issues. Now, in terms of the legislature, hope springs eternal. I hope the legislature will change, but I'm realistic and I'm pragmatic. We're dealing in a political environment with extreme gerrymandering. So even if you had a swing of 5 or 10 points in terms of who people wanted for the legislature, that wouldn't necessarily change the legislature by 5 or 10 percentage points. And by the way, that problem has bipartisan fingerprints on it. Both parties have gerrymandered through the years. Now, I will say, I think gerrymandering has been raised to an art form. It is more extreme than I think that's ever been before. Just to use the congressional lines as an example. Approximately 51%, I think my numbers are right, approximately 51% of Ohio voters voted for Democratic congressional candidates in 2012. 51% of the vote yielded 4 out of 16 congressional representatives for the Democratic Party in Ohio. Now, I would submit to you that is just a scandal. And I would say it would be just as much of a scandal if 51% voted for Republican candidates and those yielded 4 out of 16 Republican representatives. We've got to fix that in the long run. But in the short run, and I think Governor Kasich should take a leadership position on that and fix that part of our political system. I don't think it's healthy. But by the way, we're seeing ramifications of that at the federal level. The people that are the most obstinate and the most unreasonable in Congress are people that represent gerrymandered districts where even moderate conservative opinion is not relevant anymore. And that leads, I think, to extreme positions. I'm going to have a challenge with the legislature, there's no question about it. But I've had, just because I don't deal with that type of legislative body in either as a mayor or as a county executive doesn't mean that I haven't had to learn how to compromise in order to try to get programs through. And, sometimes in my county, Democrats have been more difficult sometimes than Republicans have been. But I've had a number of policy initiatives where I've basically gone to whatever legislative body that I'm dealing with, and my approach has always been very pragmatic, and I've just said, look, there are 3 categories that we can place legislation in. Things that we can agree on, things that we can compromise on, and things that we will never agree on. And that will be my approach with the legislature. We will find some things to agree on. And we will find some things that we will never agree on. And we'll find some things where we can reach some common ground. And I have had a productive working relationship with Republican members of the legislature. For instance, Speaker Batchelder and myself have a very cordial relationship. And when we've had legislation that's been important to Cuyahoga County, I can pick up the phone and call Bill, and we can talk about if we can figure out a way to agree on things. And we've been able to do that. I'm not naive about it. We're going to have some big disagreements if I'm sure, with the legislature. But the governor has too. And you have to find the balance there. And I think there are rare times too where you have to take things directly to the people of Ohio and kind of reach over the heads of the legislature. And I think there are times where you can do that.